Some games, when you play them, you can immediately feel that they are destined for controversy. And over the weekend, I had an opportunity to play Rogue Heroes, the Ruins of Tasos, and this is exactly one of those games. There are plenty of reasons that this controversy is going to arise as well. For one, the game takes a relatively creative approach of mashing an adventure game with a roguelite game. Here you're seeing a game with mechanics very similar to Zelda: A Link to the Past, put with something that matches up the mechanics of a traditional roguelite. Pairing that with some pleasant but very simplistic combat mechanics, and you have a good recipe for someone to make the argument that it's a fun game and a creative game. On the flip side though, this game suffers from a lot of issues. Most salient among these is the numerous bugs that you'll find in the game. Now, these bugs are mostly cosmetic, and I'm guessing will also be fixed relatively quickly once the game gets released, but these bugs being there at release is quite the black mark on the game's name. One particular issue they have is that this is also a co-op game, which would be a really great argument for someone trying to say that this is a great game. It's a co-op adventure roguelite game. But the online co-op doesn't work very well, and for some people it's just been outright broken. Let's take a moment though and talk about the game mechanics overall. So as I had said, this game is an adventure game and a roguelite game, and these two bits, while blended, kind of take place at different times in the game. The game opens up in the adventure mode, which you are aimed at the first dungeon. There are a total of 4 dungeons. When you get into the dungeon, the game switches into the roguelite mode. The currency that you use to grow your character and grow your city can only be found within that dungeon. When you enter the dungeon, you lose all of that currency. Through combat in that dungeon, you're expected to die. When you die, you're reborn in the city, you get to grow the city, you get to grow your character, and then you go back to the dungeon. This repeats until you finish that dungeon. Once you're done there, though, you are given some story elements and set off on a path to find the second dungeon. During that period of time, there is very little growth among your character. You may pick up some new tools, but you won't pick up any stat bonuses until you start grinding a dungeon again. The blending of these two genres is a fairly creative approach, but I did find that rather than blending them more hand in hand and having well thought out game mechanics that work together, it ended up feeling a little bit like I was playing 2 separate games. On the positive side though, both of these games seem to be fairly well done. I did enjoy the adventure parts and the story parts, and I did enjoy the roguelite parts in the dungeons as well. Combat for the game, like I previously said, is polished but shallow. You are given a sword and you get tools, much like a Legend of Zelda game. That makes it a little bit more diverse, but for the most part you are just using your sword. They try to change this up a little bit by making multiple classes available in the game, and you can change your class as you unlock them, but what I found with the classes is that they all play very similarly. You do get a special move for each individual class, but that special move doesn't seem to be particularly helpful in many cases. While your opening class can dash to some extent or sprint, the mage class can teleport, and the difference between the two are nuanced at best. One of the more impressive things about the game, though, is that it's a lot more fun to play co-op in this game. And while the online functionality of the game is in a little bit of disarray at this point, you can play remote play local co-op, which is a really interesting feature I had never used in Steam before, but functioned really well here, where I was able to play with my son on 2 separate computers with 1 key. Playing this way resulted in a pretty enjoyable experience. There are some issues in the game where you can tell that the designed mechanics weren't really perfectly implemented for co-op play. For instance, oftentimes when you hit an enemy, you will knock the enemy back a moderate amount, and it's really easy to knock an enemy into your teammate. Now, they compensate for this to some extent by making all health power-ups apply to everyone in your party. And that does help to some extent, but it also introduces some balancing issues. And this leads me into my chief criticism about this game. While a lot of the animations are really awesome and the pixel art style is suitable for this game, the sound design is unoffensive and blends well with where you are and what you're doing. Everything there seems to be on point. but the game design overall really seems like it suffered from over-scoping and under-delivering. The classes, for instance, are a prime example of this. There are a number of different classes, perhaps 10 of them in the game, and as you unlock them, you find that they are all very bland and very similar from one to the next. Some of the upgrade trees immediately seem very large and vast and branching, but then you find that many of the upgrade choices that you have are just different tiers of the exact same upgrade. For instance, your health upgrades have something like 8 or 9 different things you can do. Of those, about 4 or 5 of them are just to increase your health. But despite all these criticisms, my takeaway from Rogue Heroes was actually very positive. I do think that they need to fix all of the bugs that are being released here. So I think the real decision to be made by players in trying to choose if they want to buy this game is if they can put up with some of the game design elements that are less than stellar. This appears to be the case of a game that was overly ambitious. The scope was too large, and some of the small details, like the class systems, like some of the boss designs and enemy designs, things could have been more polished if they would have received more attention and another 2 or 3 iterations of work. They unfortunately weren't able to execute on such a broad scope in a detailed way because they're an indie studio of 2 people and ran into resource constraints. But I did say that this is going to be a controversial game. And my personal opinion is that I've had fun playing this game. I've had fun playing it by myself, I had fun playing it in co-op, and I think that other people overall will have fun as well. You do have to go into it knowing what you're getting, and that's that some of the game design elements are a little less than polished, and there are a few mostly cosmetic bugs throughout the game. But if you can accept those faults and you're a fan of both adventure open world games and roguelite games, then this one might be worth your time because it is something different. It is something creative and they tried something new here. I do think that this is not a stellar game. It's not going to be a game that's particularly memorable for a lot of people. I'm also of the opinion that this development duo has a bright future, and I think that with some polishing and some iteration, this idea could be made much better. Rogue Heroes is going to be a game that some people love and some people hate, but I think that with a little more work and with another attempt, this development studio might be able to make the sequel the game that this one was intended to be. If you've liked this video, well then like this video. And if you'd like to find out about more great games that just haven't got enough attention, take a look at my channel where I specialize in finding great indie hidden gems. Thanks for hanging out with me, and until next time, this has been Pixel.